My son stormed into my $450,000 home and said with a smile, "The kids already picked their rooms." He thought it was decided. He thought my silence meant surrender. But inside me, something old and unbroken stirred. This house carried every sacrifice I ever made. They wanted to erase me. Instead, I showed them what a father can do when he's pushed too far. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room, the late afternoon sun sliding across the floorboards I had nailed down myself almost 3 decades ago. The silence of the house felt heavy, not peaceful. I could still hear David's voice echoing in my head from earlier, sharp and certain, telling me that he, his wife Angela, their kids, and even her mother Gloria were moving into this place. He hadn't asked, he hadn't even paused. He just announced it like the house was already his. The shock of it all lingered. But as I sat there, my mind began to wander back through the years, through every sacrifice I had made to keep him standing, and it cut me deeper than any knife ever could. I thought about the day Gloria had collapsed. Angela had called me in tears, saying her mother was in the hospital, that there was a mass pressing on her organs, and that she needed immediate surgery. The hospital wanted $28,000. They didn't have it. No savings, no insurance. I had listened quietly, holding the phone in one hand and staring at the old jewelry box Mary left behind after she passed. My fingers trembled as I opened it and picked up her wedding ring, the last thing she had given me before the cancer took her. That ring was not just gold. It was memories. It was promises. It was her hand in mine across the years. And yet I took it to the jeweler the very next morning. They gave me $12,000 for it. I added another $16,000 from my savings. Between the two, we covered the cost. Angela cried and thanked me. David barely muttered a word. Gloria never even called. I never told anyone how much it broke me to part with that ring. I buried that pain. But sitting here, years later, hearing David tell me my house was now his family's solution, it all came flooding back. Every sacrifice I had made erased in a single breath. My eyes moved around the room, and they landed on the fireplace where the framed family photo still sat. The house itself was more than brick and wood. It was my life's work. $450,000. 27 years of double shifts. I worked nights at the factory, weekends doing carpentry, even scrubbing offices when I could barely stand. Every board, every window, every wall in this house had a piece of me inside it. When Mary and I first bought the lot, it was nothing but dirt and weeds. She picked out curtains, and I hammered down planks. We laughed about how the kitchen floor always squeaked in the corner. Now this house stood paid off, every dollar accounted for, the mortgage burned away by sweat. To David, though, it was just space, just square footage he wanted to rearrange. He looked at my workroom as if it were nothing but extra square feet. He pointed at the guest room like it were his to give away. The pride I once felt in these walls turned to a dull ache. They no longer saw a home. They saw a prize. I leaned back in my chair, remembering all the times I had given to David. $60,000 for college tuition, 4 years of watching him walk across a campus I worked overtime to afford. Then the $25,000 for his first car, a used SUV that I paid for in cash so he could start his job without debt. I never complained. I never asked him to pay me back. I did it because he was my son, because I believed in giving him a chance. But what I saw now was not gratitude. What I saw was a man who had grown used to taking, to assuming that my sacrifices were just stepping stones for his comfort. The father he once hugged was now just a barrier to more space, more convenience. That realization hit harder than anything. I closed my eyes and whispered, barely moving my lips, "Mary, if you could see this, what would you say? Would you shake your head at how blind I've been? Our son, the boy we raised, is standing here treating me like a guest in my own home." My chest tightened as if her absence pressed against me all over again. The betrayal burned. It was not just a house they wanted. It was my place in the family. They wanted to erase me. The shock settled into my bones first, leaving me numb, like the world had shifted and I didn't know where to stand anymore. Then it turned into anger, sharp and hot, filling the silence of the room until I could barely sit still. Anger at the way David spoke as though my opinion didn't matter. Anger at Angela's smile, pretending it was all normal. Anger that Gloria, the woman I once helped save, was now being moved into my home without even a question. But beneath all that anger, something else started to form. Determination. I had been silent too long. I had given too much without setting boundaries. If I didn't draw the line now, they would take everything. And once it was gone, there would be no getting it back. I stood up slowly, letting the weight of the moment sink in. My hand brushed over the wooden banister I carved myself, smooth from years of use. I could still remember sanding it down, making sure Mary wouldn't get a splinter when she leaned against it. Every piece of this house carried her fingerprints in one way or another. To give it up without a fight would be betraying not just myself, but her memory. I knew then that I had to act. The living room felt smaller, tighter. The ticking of the old clock on the mantel filled the silence like a drumbeat. I walked toward the study, the place where I kept my most important documents. The drawer creaked as I pulled it open. Inside lay the deed to the house, the will I had never finalized, the insurance papers all neatly stacked. I laid the deed flat on the desk and stared at it. That piece of paper was my shield, my proof, my weapon. For years it had just been a document. Now it was the line in the sand. I whispered, this time louder. You think I'm weak. You think silence means surrender. But this changes everything. The air in the room felt different after that, lighter somehow, as if making the decision had shifted something inside me. For the first time that day, I wasn't just shocked or hurt. I wasn't even just angry. I was focused. David thought he had already won, that I would fold like I always had. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. He didn't know that I still had fight left. The sun outside dipped lower, the light stretching long shadows across the floor. They touched the photograph on the mantel, Mary's smile frozen in time. I felt her with me, and I knew that whatever happened next, I wouldn't let them erase me. Not from this house, not from my own life. That night I sat by the window, the papers still spread on the desk. I traced the edges of the deed with my finger. Every number, every signature told the story of my labor. $450,000, 27 years, a lifetime. And yet, with one decision, I could protect it all, or I could lose it forever. My body ached with the weight of it, but my spirit grew stronger. The house was quiet, but not empty. It carried memories, laughter, even the arguments Mary and I once had over wallpaper. It carried everything I had fought for. And as I stared at those papers, I realized this was not just about walls and rooms. It was about respect. It was about dignity. If I gave in now, I would lose both. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the drawer, but not too deeply. They needed to be ready. Tomorrow, I will start making calls. Tomorrow, I would remind them that I was still here. Tonight, though, I sat in the quiet, letting the decision settle into my bones. The silence was no longer heavy. It was steady. It was the silence before a storm. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun had a chance to warm the kitchen tile. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. I stood by the sink and watched the coffee drip, slow and steady, little brown drops falling like a metronome. Yesterday's words were still in the air. My son had stood right here and declared the future like a judge. We already decided. My wife, our kids, and her mother are moving in. He did not blink when he said it. He did not ask if I agreed. He spoke as if the deed in my desk had turned blank overnight. I remember reaching for the counter so I would not sway. That is how hard a sentence can hit a father. It does not have to be shouted to break something inside you. By mid-morning, I heard tires in the driveway. David did not knock. He pushed the door with the old habit of a boy who grew up here, except he was not a boy now. He was a man with a plan I had not been invited to hear. Angela came in behind him with a bright voice, the kind that tries to soften hard news. The children ran to the backyard like sparrows, their shoes tapping across the boards I laid with my own hands. David walked the rooms as if he were conducting an inspection. He pointed once, twice, 3 times. He said the kids would take my workroom because it had good light. He said the guest room would be perfect for Gloria because it was close to the hallway and the bathroom. He said he and Angela would take the pullout for now. For now. I have lived long enough to know those 2 words can stretch for years. I followed him to the workroom and stood at the frame of the door. The smell of sawdust lives in wood the way smoke lives in old coats. I built the benches in there. I sharpened my chisels in there. I kept the scrap from Mary's favorite table in that corner, the piece with the knot that looks like an eye. David tapped the table with 2 fingers and said we could store it in the garage. He did not mean we. He meant me. He did not see my jaw tighten. He did not hear my breath shorten. He looked at this room like it were unused space. He looked at me like I was a shadow on the wall. For a second, I felt the oddest thing. I felt like a guest in my own life, a quiet man watching strangers decide what would happen to him. That feeling did not last. It hardened and became something else. Angela stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand, a smile as sweet as frosting. She said she had already talked to the couple next door. She said they were excited for the kids to have friends close by and for Gloria to have company. She laughed a little and said she had set up the internet too. She told me the appointment time and date if she were telling me when lunch would be delivered. Next Thursday at 9 in the morning. The installer will need access to the basement, she said. I looked at the ceiling and listened for the sound of my heart. It was there. It was steady. But something else rose in me, slow and heavy. They had told the neighbors. They had arranged services. They had started to lay their lives across mine like a heavy blanket. It was not just about space anymore. It was about erasing the shape of me from these rooms. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask them to stop. I watched. I listened. I let the words sit in the room so we could all feel their weight. When they left the door half open. I closed it with care. I stood on the porch and watched the street settle back into its quiet self. A blue jay crossed from the maple to the wire and scolded something I could not see. I went inside and washed the coffee cup. I dried it with a towel Mary embroidered with small blue flowers. I folded the towel twice and put it back on the oven handle. Then I walked to the study. The deed waited where I had left it the night before. Thick paper, clean edges, a history written in numbers and lines and signatures. I set it in the center of the desk. I added my driver's license, my Social Security card, the folder with my insurance papers, and the binder with every tax return for the last 7 years. I lined the pens in a row. I felt the tremor in my hand settle. I did not feel small. I felt ready. I called James Carter. He is an old friend in a crisp suit, the kind of lawyer who reads everything twice and carries a pen that never runs out. I told him what David had said. I told him what Angela had done. I told him what the plan sounded like to me. He listened the way good men listen, without hurrying you. Then he said the words I needed. You own that house, Thomas. You do not have tenants. You do not have a lease with them. You do not have to let anyone move in. He told me about a no trespass notice. He told me about certified letters and how silence can sometimes look like consent if you let it run long. He told me to write down dates and times. He told me to keep everything in a folder. He asked me if anyone else had keys. I told him David had a copy. He said, then change the locks. Today, he asked me if I wanted to put the house into a living trust to make decisions faster later on. He said we could draw up documents. He asked me how I wanted this to end. It is a clean question when you are ready. I told him I wanted control back. I told him I wanted to choose what happened in my home. We set an appointment for the afternoon. He said, bring the deed, bring your ID, bring your checkbook, so we can file whatever needs filing. Then his voice went quiet and kind. He said, "Thomas, you are doing the right thing." I thanked him and stared at the phone a second after the call ended. The old clock on the mantel clicked to the next minute. The room did not feel heavy anymore. It felt like a workshop. I knew what to do. I dialed Robert next. Robert Miller has been my friend for more years than I can count without using my fingers. He is a straight talker. He once told his own daughter no when she tried to move him out of his place and sell it behind his back. He answered on the second ring and said my name the way friends say it. Not as a question, but as a door that opens. I told him what happened. He did not gasp. He did not pile on words. He said 3 sentences that settled in me like iron. "You are not a spare part. You do not owe them your roof. If you need me, I will stand right next to you." I asked him for a small favor. I told him I might need a name at the county clerk's office who could help make sure filings moved without sitting forgotten in a tray. He said he would call Connie, an old classmate who works there. He said she is kind and knows the process, and that she owes him a plate of ribs from a 4th of July she never paid back. We laughed because sometimes laughter is a bridge across a hard moment. Then he grew quiet and said, "They think you will fold. Do not fold." I made a third call, one I had not made in years. I called Earl Thompson. He is a man I once helped when a storm took half his roof. I spent 2 weekends up on a ladder hammering shingles because he did not have $1 to pay a contractor. He answered with surprise and warmth and told me he still puts a hand on that roof and says a blessing for me. I told him I needed a small thing in return. I asked if he would come by later and help me change the locks. He said he would bring the kit and the good drill. Before noon, I drove to the bank. The branch smelled like paper and polish. The manager knows me by name. Her name is Linda Park, and she has a calm way of talking that keeps a person steady. I told her I wanted to open a new account in my name only. No online access set up yet. No joint anything. No linked cards. I told her I wanted alerts on every transaction. I told her I wanted to move $80,000 from my savings into it today. She did not blink. She asked me a series of questions to verify identity, then slid the forms across the desk. I signed where she pointed. She asked if I wanted a safe deposit box. I said yes. She walked me to the back and let me hold the little brass key in my palm. It was smaller than I expected. It felt like a promise. I told her I would place in it the documents that mattered most. On the way out, she touched my elbow and said, "If you need anything, you come straight to me." I went to the hardware store after. The man at the counter knows me from years of buying nails and varnish. I bought 3 deadbolts and a handful of screws that would bite hard into old wood. I bought a little bag of felt pads because Mary always said I should protect the floors, even from the furniture I loved. Old habits help a person breathe. Earl met me at the house with his drill already in his hand. We did not talk much. We worked. The sound of the drill filled the entryway. Metal turned and seated. The new locks slid into place. When we were done, he stood back and said, "That will hold." He looked at me as if to say, "So will you." I shook his hand and thanked him, and he waved off the thanks like a good neighbor who thinks goodness should be ordinary. I ate a sandwich at the counter. I took small bites and chewed slowly. I read the note I had made that morning. Times, dates, names, internet installation, next Thursday at 9. I wrote the provider's name on the margin and the account number Angela had left open on her phone when she showed me the confirmation. I read it once and then folded the note and put it in my wallet. Knowledge is a tool. Even when you do not swing it yet, it fits into your hand and changes your posture. At 2, I drove to James Carter's office near the old courthouse. The halls there smell like wax and old paper. His assistant brought coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with respect. James laid the papers out on the table and nodded as he read. He asked questions. "Did anyone ever pay rent here?" "No." "Did you ever sign a document giving them the right to move in?" "No." "Has anyone threatened you?" "Not with words." He nodded and took notes. He drafted a letter on the spot. It said that I retained full and exclusive possession of my home. It said that any attempt to occupy the residence without my written permission would be trespass. It said that any utilities ordered in my name without consent would be canceled. He told me to send the letter by certified mail after he added the final language. He told me to print a copy and keep it by the door. He told me we could also move quickly on a living trust that would put all decisions in my hands with clarity if anything happened to me. He told me to consider whether selling the house made sense for peace of mind. He looked at me and did not push. He simply placed a blank line on the last page where my name might go one day, soon. We also spoke of the bank. He said I had done the right thing in moving funds. He advised me to check my credit reports for any unauthorized pulls. He reminded me that silence can sometimes invite boldness. He said, if they show up with a truck and a smile, you show them the letter. You do not argue in the yard. You do not raise your voice. You let the paper speak. He leaned back and took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose the way men do when they carry other people's burdens for a living. Then he looked up and smiled. He said, you are handling this like a man who knows his worth. On my way home, I stopped by the post office and rented a small box with a metal door that clicked shut with a sound that felt like a line drawing itself. I filled out the change of address form for important mail. That little act felt bigger than it looked. It was a way of telling the world that my choices would not be intercepted in my own mailbox. When I got back, the late light had turned the hallway a warm honey color. I stood in the doorway of my workroom and ran a finger across the bench. The dust there made a pale line. I could hear David's voice again, casual, certain, and I could hear another voice rise to meet it. It was my own. They think I have lost, but the game has just begun. I said it out loud. Then I said it again, slower, so the room could learn the sound. I sat at the desk and stacked the documents by height. Deed, letter, copies, IDs, one pen I trust, a backup pen in case the ink dries in the moment I need it. I opened the laptop and typed out a plain, careful note to my neighbor on the left. I told them there had been confusion about plans. I told them if anyone asked about access to my basement next Thursday, they should tell the installer to call me first. I gave them my number. I thanked them for their kindness to Mary all those years ago when she came home from the hospital and could not lift the groceries from the trunk. I pressed send and sat back. It is good to be clear without being cruel. I thought about calling David. I thought about the words I would choose, how I would shape them so they could not be twisted. I did not want to fight over the phone. I wanted a record. I decided on a text. Short, calm, firm, but before I wrote it, I walked the house. I put my hand on the newel post at the bottom of the stairs. I opened and closed the kitchen drawers, slow, like reminding them they still knew my touch. I went to the bedroom and stood for a long time by the window where Mary used to watch the birds in the morning. A sparrow landed and cocked its head and then was gone. I whispered, "If you're listening, I am doing this for both of us." The room felt warm, even with the evening air cooling outside. I took that as an answer. Back at the desk, I drafted the message. "Son, let me put things in order before you move in." I read it 3 times. I added nothing more. The fewer words, the clearer the meaning. I pressed send and watched the small bubble float and then settle into place. There is a power in calm language. It throws people who expect heat. A moment later, my phone buzzed. It was David. He sent a thumbs up and a line that read, "Good, we can come Saturday morning with a truck. Easier that way." I stared at the words and felt the oddest mix of sadness and clarity. He had no idea what I was doing. He had no idea that every hour between now and Saturday would be used to build a bridge to my own dignity. He had no idea that paper can be stronger than anger, that ink can be a shield. I printed the letter James had drafted in its current form and placed it in a clear sleeve near the door. I took a photograph of the deed and backed it up to a small flash drive, and then placed that drive in the safe deposit box envelope with the little brass key. I wrote down the installer appointment again on a fresh card and clipped it to the calendar. Then I made a list for the morning. Call James to finalize language. Ask Susan Grant, the realtor with the steady voice and the patient eyes, to meet for a walkthrough and evaluation. No sign in the yard yet. Quiet is better. Call the bank to confirm the transfer showed up and the alerts were set. Take the trash to the curb and set out the old chairs in the garage for goodwill. The most ordinary tasks are anchor points when the sea gets rough. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the living room. The floorboards held the last of the day's light. It looked like a river had found its path through the house. I thought about the children choosing rooms that were not theirs. I thought about Angela speaking to neighbors I had known for 20 years as if I were an address and not a person. I thought about my son saying we already decided. Those 4 words were a gate slamming. They had forced me to choose whether I lived inside my own life or outside it. I chose inside. Night came slowly. I locked the new deadbolts with the soft click, which means the door knows its job. I stood a long moment in the hallway and listened to the house breathe. Then I went to the study for one last look at the papers. I touched the deed with the backs of my fingers. Gentle, the way you touch a baby's cheek. I said, not loud, but clear. They will learn. They will learn that a man can be quiet and still be strong. They will learn that the person who pays every bill is not a doormat, but a door that can close. I turned off the lamp. The room went dark except for a thin line of light at the edge of the shade. I left it like that, a small lighthouse in a harbor I knew better than my own hands. Tomorrow would carry me into offices and signatures and choices. Tonight was for steady breath and a long, slow thought. They think I have lost. They think they have already moved their lives into mine. They think silence is a surrender note. But the game has just begun. I fell asleep in the chair, the kind of sleep you get when a decision finally sits down inside you and puts its feet up. When I woke, the first bird was singing somewhere beyond the maple. I stood and stretched and felt the good soreness of a man who had worked with wood all day. I made coffee. I drank it black. I watched the steam rise and fade. Then I walked to the desk and checked the list. There is comfort in a list when you are building something new. The phone rang at 9. James had the final letter ready. He asked if I wanted him to email it and to print one for me to sign in person. I told him both. He said he had also prepared the first page for a living trust and a simple directive that kept decisions where they belong. He said we could record anything we needed with the county by the end of the day if I wished. I told him I wished. He said to bring a check for the filing fees. I said I would. He said his assistant would meet me at the front with a folder and a smile. I thanked him and felt that same lightness again, the kind that shows up when a plan has bones and not just hope. Before I left, I looked at the text thread one more time. Son, let me put things in order before you move in. Good. Saturday morning is easier. The word sat there, 2 lines of different worlds. I slid the phone into my pocket and picked up the folder. I opened the door and stepped into the day. They do not know what I am holding. They do not know what Saturday will mean. They do not know that I have put in motion something they cannot stop. They do not know, but they will. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to a gray morning and the smell of rain on the street. The house held its breath. I made coffee and stood at the sink like I always do, watching the steam rise and disappear. The new deadbolts clicked smoothly when I tested them, a small sound that felt like a promise. At 9, tires scraped the curb, doors slammed, voices carried. David had arrived with 2 men in work boots and tape measures hanging from their belts. He did not knock. He pushed the door open with the old carelessness of a kid who never had to wait on permission, then stepped aside to let the workers in, like he was the one who owned the place. They moved straight to my workroom, The men called numbers back and forth, measuring the wall where my bookcase sat, measuring the bench I built the year Mary got sick, and I needed a place to keep my hands busy. One man tapped the shelves with a knuckle and said they could be out in under an hour if the screws were clean. The other wrote notes like he was itemizing an estate. David was talking the whole time. He said the kids would need desk space here. He said the light was good and the sound from the street was quiet. He said the old table could go to the garage. He did not ask about the table. He did not ask about anything. He spoke like a man moving pieces on a board. I stood in the doorway and felt my hands tremble. It was not fear. It was anger finding its feet. The worker reached for a screwdriver, casual, ready, as if all that wood were just dead weight. I said his name without raising my voice. He looked up and stepped back because he heard something in the way I formed the word. David laughed a little and told him to ignore me, that we were just getting a head start. The screwdriver hovered. I took one step into the room and set my palm flat on the bench. That bench had held every repair I had ever made for this family, every toy with a wheel that would not turn, every chair with a leg that wobbled. I felt the grain under my hand and knew, as clear as I have ever known anything, that this would not be stripped in front of me. Right there, with a stranger's metal tool about to bite into my work, my decision took shape. I would sell the house. I would sell it before they could take one board from these walls. I told the men we were done for today. I said it steadily. The steadiness made them listen. David started to argue, but the words sounded thin even to him. He shrugged, rolled his eyes, and told them they'd come back Saturday with the truck anyway. He said Saturday was like a victory. When they left, he kept talking too loudly in the hallway, telling Angela on the phone to confirm the internet appointment, telling someone else to bring the folding chairs. He did it where I could hear. He wanted me to hear. The door closed on the last word. The quiet came back. It did not feel heavy. It felt like a tool in my hand. I took the folder from the desk and slid the deed to the house on top. I checked the letter James had drafted and folded it into an envelope stamped and ready. I put my driver's license and checkbook in my jacket pocket. I tucked the brass key to the safe deposit box into my wallet. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank to confirm yesterday's transfer. $80,000 sat in the new account, in my name only, with alerts set, as if it had always been there waiting on me to claim it. The teller read the balance, the routing numbers, and the transaction ID. I wrote them down on a card and stuck it in the folder. Numbers settle nerves. They also build a backbone. By noon, I was in James Carter's office, the one with the tall windows that looked down at the old courthouse lawn. The room smelled like polish and paper. James read the notes I had made from the morning. He did not look surprised. He added 3 lines to the letter. He said we would send it certified to David and Angela, and a separate copy to Gloria for clean record keeping. He printed a second page with simple language about exclusive possession and entry permitted only with written consent. He said the paper was not a shield against people who will not listen, but it is a sword against people who think the law is a suggestion. He asked if I wanted to proceed with the trust documents we had discussed. I said yes. He filled in names. He added a clause that made my wishes plain. Clarity is kindness to your future self. He told me the notary would be in at 2. He asked if I still wanted to pursue a quiet sale. I said yes. I signed the wire request to move the $80,000 from my old savings to the new account, although the transfer had already posted. He nodded and slid a small receipt toward me. He tapped it with a finger. Keep that. He handed me a second piece of paper and said, "This is the certified mail receipt for the letters we are sending at 3. He printed a third thing, a simple inventory of the documents we had filed. He asked if I wanted clean copies of everything in a sealed envelope for the safe deposit box. I said yes. He sealed it, labeled it with today's date, and put it in my hand. The weight of the paper is small. The weight of what it means is not. At 2, after the notary watched me sign and stamp the pages with her neat square seal, I drove to meet Susan Grant. Her office sits near the old pharmacy where Mary and I used to buy milkshakes on Saturdays. Susan's handshake was firm. Her eyes were kind without being soft. We walked through the house together in a silence that was not awkward. She touched the banister and said the wood was good. She asked how quickly I wanted to move. I said as soon as it is fair. She told me the market in our pocket of town was still steady for houses like mine. 1 story, good light, solid kitchen, a yard that would not scare a person with bad knees. She said she could list it at $450,000, and she had a client who had lost out on 2 similar homes in the last month. The client was pre-approved. The client loved the neighborhood. The client had a mother who would move in with her in the fall. She said if I wanted to avoid a yard sign and gossip, we could do it quietly, by appointment only, and accept a clean offer with a short closing. I looked at the window where Mary once stood and watched the birds. I said, let us do it. Susan placed the contract on the kitchen counter and set her pen beside it. I read every line. I did not hurry. I initialed where she placed the small yellow flags. I signed my name in the long space at the end. The pen felt heavy and then light. Susan took the hard copy and said she would call me as soon as the offer came in. She did not say if. She said when. She was right. At 5, my phone rang. Her voice carried a smile. The buyer had offered full price, no requests for repairs, a 30-day close, but willing to move the timeline up if wanted. She said the buyer admired the workmanship of the trim and the floors and the way the light fell in the workroom. She said the buyer had asked if the bookcase might stay. I said the bookcase would stay for the buyer and for no one else. She said she would come by in the morning with the final papers for my signature. I thanked her and set the phone on the counter. Then I poured water into a glass and drank it slowly. The house was not empty. It was turning a page. Friday passed in a series of small, precise steps. James called to confirm the letters had been sent and that the post office had scanned them. I drove to the bank and laid the sealed envelope in the safe deposit box and closed the small brass door with a click that sounded like confidence. Susan arrived with the contract and the disclosures, and I signed them at the dining table. We stood for a moment by the window, and she said I was doing a brave thing. I told her it did not feel brave. It felt like daylight after a long tunnel. We shook hands. Her eyes were steady. She left with the file under her arm. Saturday morning, the street woke early. 9 o'clock, just like he said. A rented truck pulled up to the curb, white paint flashing in the sun like a grin. David jumped out with a clipboard and a roll of tape, calling instructions like a foreman. Angela followed with a plastic tub of houseplants pressed to her chest. The children tumbled out of the back seat holding pillows. A welcome mat leaned in the truck bed, still in its plastic wrap. A mover in a blue shirt raised the back door and looked to the porch for a signal. I stood at the top of the steps with my hands folded. The iron doormat under my shoes had sat there since the winter Mary and I first moved in. The air smelled like cut grass and diesel. A neighbor's wind chimes clinked a warning. "Go ahead and open up, Dad," David said, cheerful, loud enough for the world to hear. "We'll start with the big boxes. The guys will handle the bookcase." "Nothing goes in," I said. My voice was even, clear. "This house has been sold." The sentence landed. It stopped sounding like a switch. Angela's face crumpled, then flushed. "What do you mean, sold?" she asked. The planter in her arms tipped, and a ribbon of dirt slid toward her elbow. One of the kids said Mom in a small voice. The mover in the blue shirt closed his mouth and looked at the street. David laughed once, a hard bark that wasn't laughter at all. "Very funny, Dad. Open the door." I did not move. "The sale is signed. The buyer is under contract. We close soon. You won't be unloading here." Angela shook her head in disbelief, then anger. "You can't just do that. We told the kids. We gave notice to our landlord. We set up the internet." Her voice broke on the last word. The fragility in it might have touched me on another day. Today it sounded like a choice they made without me. David came up the steps 2 at a time, close enough that I could see the lines in his forehead, the shadow of a beard he had not shaved clean. He lowered his voice, not to be kind, but to intimidate. "Open the door," he said. "We already decided." I held his eyes without blinking. You decided for yourself, not for me. Read this. I stepped sideways and handed him the letter from James. It was in a clear sleeve. The first line stated my name and my exclusive possession of the property. The second line stated that any attempt to occupy the residence without my written consent would be trespass. The third line clarified utilities and access. David skimmed the first paragraph and tossed the page toward the porch rail. It bounced and slid to the top step. Paper, he said with a shake of his head, the word sour. You think a letter scares me? It is not meant to scare you, I said. It is meant to tell you the truth. Angela's distress shifted into anger. After everything we did for you, she began, and stopped when the sentence twisted in her throat, because even she heard how wrong it sounded. David turned to the movers and waved his hand in a circle. Start unloading, he said. The men hesitated. One of them cleared his throat and asked me in a soft voice if we were still doing the drop. He stared at the boards under my feet as if there were instructions written there. No, I said, you won't be unloading here. The mover nodded, slow, grateful for clarity. He shut the truck door, metal rattling into place like the end of a song. The kids stood with their pillows gathered in their arms. One of them looked like he might cry, and then didn't. This is not their fault, I told myself. This is not on them. Angela set the planter back in the truck. David stared at me and breathed hard, the kind of breathing you do after a long run or a long rage. Then he spoke low, like a threat. You're making a mistake, he said. You'll regret this. I regret raising a son who thought I was a door to be pushed, I said. I'm a father, not an asset. The words were simple. The truth in them was not. They left in a storm of small noises. The truck roared. A box shifted. Someone slammed a door too hard. When the street quieted again, the wind chimes on the porch next door found their song. I picked up the letter from the step and wiped a smudge with my thumb. I put it back in the sleeve and set it by the door. The house exhaled. So did I. On Monday afternoon, they came back. This time, David did not come alone. Uncle Frank trailed him up the walk, hat in hand, eyes cautious the way good men's eyes are when they are asked to stand in the middle of a family's fight. They did not wait to be invited in. They followed me to the dining table because that is where reckoning always seems to happen. I had set out 3 mugs. Mine held fresh coffee. Theirs sat empty on the placemats Mary sewed during the winter she learned how to quilt. David started talking before he sat. He said I had embarrassed him. He said the kids were confused. He said Angela was a wreck. He said we had all talked about this before, as if that were true. He said the landlord had already taken their notice. He said the truck had cost money we did not have. He said a lot of things that sounded big in his mouth and small in the room. Uncle Frank cleared his throat and tried a different key. He said, Tom, nobody is saying you didn't work hard for this place. He said, family is family. He said, maybe we could do a few months just to ease into things. He said, we can figure out rent later. He spoke kindly, but the words still stacked in a pile of assumptions. I did not interrupt. I let the air carry what they brought. Then I set the folder on the table and opened it. The top page was the contract for sale, signed by me and by the buyer, countersigned by Susan, the realtor, with the date and time stamped in neat type. The second page listed the price, $450,000, the deposit paid, and the closing schedule. The third page was the letter from James, with the certified mail receipt stapled to it. The fourth was a 1-page statement from my doctor, dated last month, with the sentence that mattered most written in clear language. Patient is of sound mind, oriented, capable of making independent legal and financial decisions. The fifth was the bank confirmation for the transfer of $80,000 into my single-owner account. I pushed the stack toward David. He did not take it. He stared at the top page like it was blank. Uncle Frank leaned in and read the first paragraph. His finger traced a line the way men do when they mean to get it right. He leaned back and looked at me, and his eyes had changed. He saw it. He saw that this was not a bluff. David reached for the papers, then grabbed them more than lifted them, scanned, flipped, scanned again. His face shifted across 4 expressions in 3 seconds. Surprise, anger, calculation. The last one was something like loss. He tossed the papers down, not on the table, but at the edge, where the pile almost slid. I steadied it with my palm. He said, "So you planned this behind my back?" I met his gaze. No, I planned it quietly because talking out loud only gave me time to push harder. You pushed hard anyway. I chose paper over shouting, paper holds. He said I had cut off my family. He said I had turned my back on blood. He said I had made this all about money. No, I said, and set my coffee down so the cup would not shake. I made this about respect. Money pays for wood and nails. Respect is what makes a house a home. You took that for granted. You tried to take the rest. Uncle Frank looked between us from son to father and saw that we stood on different shores. He picked up a mug, set it back down, then spoke with a tired kindness. "David," he said, "your father drew a line. It is his right." David did not want to hear that. He pushed his chair back and stood. The leg scraped the floor with a sound that will always make me think of this day. He pointed at me and then at the ceiling as if the house had ears. "You think you won?" he said. "You think this piece of paper makes you strong." "I do not need paper to be strong," I said, "but it helps when people stop listening." His mouth opened and shut. He didn't find the words he wanted. He turned and walked out, shoulders tight, steps too fast. The front door slammed with a crack that made the picture on the wall tilt a little. Uncle Frank stayed a second longer. He picked up the contract and read the buyer's name and then set it down with care. He put his hat back on, and when he looked at me, his eyes had sorrow in them. Not the kind that asks you to fix it, the kind that simply sits beside you. "Take care of yourself, Tom," he said. "You did what you had to do." Then he left, quietly, the way a man leaves a church after a service that cut close. I stood alone in the dining room and listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock, the whisper of the air through the vent. The house sounded like itself again. I gathered the papers, squared the corners, and slid them back into the folder. I made one phone call. Susan answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened and asked her to push the buyer's timeline to the earliest date possible. I told her I was ready for the next step. She said she would call the buyer tonight and the title company in the morning. She said we could move fast. I said, "Let's finish it. I'm ready." I walked the rooms once more in the late afternoon light. The floors held the day like a warm memory. The workroom smelled like cedar and thyme. I put my hand on the bench and felt gratitude, not grief. I had thought the grief would swallow me. It didn't. It stood in the corner and watched me take my life back. I told Mary out loud that I had done what I promised yesterday. I told her the house would belong to someone who saw it as a home, not as square footage to be sliced up. The room felt steady. A small breeze slipped under the window and touched my face. Night came with a soft rain. I sat by the window and watched the street darken, the porch light painting a small circle on the steps. Somewhere a dog barked once and then not again. My phone buzzed. It was Susan. She had spoken with the buyer. They were ready to close in 2 weeks if the title company could run the records that fast. I said thank you and hung up. Then I set the phone down and let the quiet do its work. I could feel tomorrow forming, not as a threat, but as a thing I could reach for. They thought I would fold. They thought I would stand on this porch and hold the door while they carried in boxes and plans and assumptions. They thought the word alone meant weak. They were wrong. I am not alone. I have the law. I have my voice. I have a lifetime of work that taught me how to be patient and precise. I will sleep tonight. I will wake tomorrow. I will sign what needs signing. I will pack what matters. I will walk out with my head up and my name intact. It is a strange kind of victory to sit in the same chair and feel the room change, to look at the same walls and know they belong to a story that will soon have a different chapter, a different reader. But it is a victory all the same. The house did not save me. I saved the house from becoming a place where I did not exist. If you stand long enough in a doorway, you learn what thresholds are for. They are not just for entry, they are for choosing. The rain slowed. The wind chimes answered the last drops with a faint music. I closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and let the dark settle. I had done what I came to do. Tomorrow I will do the rest. Feeling unseen is heavy, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen, type the word seen. Now watch what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I carried the last box into the bungalow myself, the one on the corner of West Eugene with the faded green shutters and a yard just big enough for roses and tomatoes. The house cost $220,000, and every penny came from the sale of the home I once thought I would die in. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened without a creak. It smelled like paint and fresh wood, not like the years of ghosts that clung to the old place. I set the box down, leaned on the counter, and let the silence fill me. It was not the heavy silence of betrayal. It was the light silence of freedom. The first morning there, I woke early. Light filtered through clean curtains, not the heavy drapes Mary had chosen, but simple cotton that swayed in the faint breeze. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the small porch. The sun poured over the roofs of the houses across the street. For the first time in years, I felt no weight on my chest. I was not listening for a car in the driveway or a key in the lock that did not belong. I was not waiting for footsteps to claim rooms that were not theirs. I sat with my coffee and knew that the space I occupied was mine. Entirely mine. Later that week, Mary Collins from 2 houses down knocked on my door. She asked if I knew how to fix a drill that had jammed. Her husband used to handle such things, but he had passed a few years back. I took the drill apart at the kitchen table, cleaned the motor, oiled the gears, and handed it back running smoothly. She smiled and offered me a plate of lemon bars in thanks. That moment, small as it was, reminded me of who I had always been. A man who built, repaired, gave, not the man my own son had tried to reduce to an obstacle in his way. Word of the sale must have reached them quickly, because within a week David began to call. First, it was his voice, angry, telling me I had humiliated him, that I had ruined his plans. Then it was texts, long, sharp, filled with half threats, half pleading. Then came silence, broken only by an email from a law firm I recognized. He had hired an attorney to contest the sale, but the documents were airtight. James had seen to that. The deed was clean, the signatures witnessed, the medical evaluation attached in case anyone dared suggest I was not of sound mind. Every paper lined up like soldiers, each one a defense. When David's lawyer filed, James replied with precision. Certified copies, case law citations, even the doctor's report that stated clearly I was competent and deliberate. The suit did not survive 2 hearings. Dismissed with prejudice, James said, meaning they could not drag me through the mud a second time on the same claim. I sat in his office when he told me, and I felt a wave of something more than relief. It was vindication. The law had not only protected me, it had spoken my truth aloud. David tried one more time, showing up at the bungalow on a Sunday afternoon. He knocked and waited. I opened the door just far enough to meet his eyes. He started with words about family, about how misunderstandings can be mended, about how Angela was suffering, how the children missed their grandfather. Then his voice shifted, sharpened, and he said that maybe we could still work something out if I considered helping them with a down payment on a different house. I let him talk. When he stopped, I answered softly but firmly, "I don't need your apology, David. I don't need your terms. I have myself. That's enough." Then I closed the door. I stood behind it for a long moment, my hand flat against the wood, and I felt no guilt. I felt a boundary settle into place. Some doors, once closed, are not meant to open again. The days began to find rhythm. Coffee at sunrise, walks through the quiet neighborhood, fixing the squeak in a chair for Mrs. Collins, reading novels I had left unopened for years. Sometimes in the evenings, I sat on the back step and watched the garden lights blink on, the vines catching silver in their leaves. Peace is not loud. It is steady. It is the absence of fear that someone will strip away what you built. News filtered back to me through neighbors. David and Angela had moved into a rented apartment on the far side of town, smaller than what they were used to. No yard for the children, no room for Gloria to stay. He worked longer hours now, I was told. Angela was quieter at the grocery store. Some people said they looked worn, older than their years. It was not joy that I felt when I heard this. It was recognition. Actions have weight. Choices have consequences. One night, sitting at my small table with a notebook open, I wrote the words that had been circling in my head. I am not an asset. I am a father. I underlined it once, then again. I whispered to Mary, as I often did, telling her that I had finally learned to defend what mattered. Not just walls or dollars, but dignity. The lessons grew clear in my mind, and I held them like stones polished by water. For parents, I thought, the lesson is simple. Do not let your sacrifices become debts that others believe they can collect forever. Set boundaries, guard them. Love deeply, but not blindly. For children, the truth is harsher. Greed and ingratitude will cost you more than any fortune gained. They lost a house, yes, but more than that, they lost respect, and respect is harder to earn back than any mortgage. And for all of us, in a world where family ties often come with assumptions, the core of who we are is not blood, but character. Respect is thicker than blood. There were moments, of course, when loneliness brushed against me. But it did not stay. It was not the same as being erased in my own home. Loneliness can be eased by a knock on the door from a neighbor, by the sound of children riding bikes down the block, by planting roses that bloom with reckless color in late spring. Betrayal cannot be eased. It must be cut off, healed over, left behind. One afternoon, I stood at the garden fence and watched the light settle on the trellis where I had just planted climbing flowers. The sun made the wood glow. I thought to myself, this is what it means to turn a page. The old house had been a chapter. This was a new one, a quieter chapter, but written in my own hand. I no longer checked the phone for calls from David. I no longer waited for apologies that would never carry weight. When an email came from him, short and uncertain, I did not reply. Boundaries are a non-cruelty. They are for survival. I sat back in the chair on my porch and felt the breeze on my face. I don't need them anymore, I said softly. I have myself. The words tasted like truth. As weeks turned into months, I found myself joining the local community center. They were starting a small woodworking class, nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering to make birdhouses and shelves. I signed up. On the first evening, I walked in with my old toolbox and felt the familiar comfort of sawdust in the air, the sound of laughter, the tap of hammers, the smell of pine. It wrapped me like a memory of who I had always been. The story that began with betrayal ended with me building again. Not for David, not for Angela, not for anyone who saw me as a stepping stone, but for myself, and for the people who valued the work for what it was. I knew then that I had stepped out from under a shadow. The house was gone, but the burden was gone with it. What remained was mine: peace, dignity, the quiet joy of mornings that belonged to me alone. And as I watered the small roses in my yard, watching the petals catch the last light of the day, I smiled, not because I had won, because I had chosen. I spend my mornings now with the smell of sawdust clinging to my shirt and the sound of hammers echoing through the small workshop at the community center. The local woodworking club became my anchor after I moved into the bungalow. Retired men and women bring in wobbly tables, broken chairs, and old picture frames they refuse to throw away. I steady the wood under my hands, run sandpaper along the grain, and I feel the rhythm of purpose again. There is laughter, coffee brewing in the corner, and stories traded between strokes of varnish. No one there cares about what I lost. They only see what I can still build. That is more valuable than any apology I could ever receive. One afternoon, after class, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name is written in David's hand. I knew the script instantly, heavy, leaning, the same way he used to sign birthday cards when he was a boy. For a moment, my chest tightened. I carried it to the table, sat down, and opened it slowly. Inside was a letter filled with words I had once prayed to hear, apologies, explanations, talk of regret, and promises to change. He wrote that Angela was struggling, that the children asked about me, and that maybe we could start again. I read every line, and when I reached the end, I folded it carefully, slid it into the drawer beside my bed, and left it there. I did not answer. Some wounds close only when silence seals them. As I sat back in my chair, the thought formed clear and sharp. I don't need their apology. I have my life. That is enough. I repeated it softly, the way a man repeats a truth he finally believes. The weight of waiting, waiting for them to see me, waiting for them to value me, was gone. All that remained was the quiet steadiness of knowing who I am. Word reached me through distant relatives about David and Angela. Their plan to take the house had failed so publicly that trust was scarce. They had moved into a cramped apartment complex near the highway, paying rent higher than they could manage, their savings drained by legal fees. Gloria could not live with them anymore, and the cousins who once admired David's ambition now kept their distance. Pride had turned to silence around them. I did not rejoice in this news, but I recognized it for what it was. Consequence. They had traded respect for greed, and it left them poorer than before. The contrast between my life and theirs could not have been sharper. I walked in the park each evening, the air cool and wide, the sky stretched in soft colors. I stopped by the pond where ducks drifted and watched children toss breadcrumbs from the bank. My bungalow, though modest, sat steady, and mine alone. The roses bloomed wild in the yard, and sometimes neighbors stopped to admire them. I was no longer a man fighting to defend what was his. I was simply a man living, free of the shadows of betrayal. In those walks I began to form the lessons in my heart, not just for me, but for anyone willing to listen. For parents, the lesson is to remember that sacrifice is not a blank check. We give, yes, but we must also draw lines. If we never guard those lines, even love can be twisted into chains. For children, the warning is sharper. Gratitude is not optional. It is the thread that holds families together. Without it, you may gain property or money, but you will lose something greater: trust, respect, belonging. And in the modern world, I have learned that blood is not always the bond that matters most. Respect, honesty, and character run deeper than blood. They are what sustain us when family fails. A few weeks later, I opened an old box I had carried through every move. Inside was my father's pocket watch, the brass worn thin but still ticking faintly. I set it on the table and wound it carefully. The steady rhythm filled the room. It reminded me that time is what you make of it. You can spend it chasing what others demand of you, or you can claim it for yourself. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Character is the only inheritance no one can steal." Those words felt like the closing of a circle. The seasons shifted. The garden stretched into full bloom. I joined the community center not only for woodworking, but for volunteering, helping younger men who wanted to learn a trade, speaking with widows who needed repairs done in their homes. Each day carried purpose. Each day reminded me that I had chosen the harder path, but also the right one. I never replied to David's letter. The drawer still holds it, but it no longer tugs at me. It sits there like an artifact of a life I will not return to. My story with him ended not with reconciliation, but with a boundary strong enough to hold. Sometimes that is the only ending possible, and sometimes it is enough. As I walked in the park this morning, the air crisp with early autumn, I breathed deep and thought, I have finally found where I belong. The betrayal did not define me. My response did. I am not just a father wronged, I am a man who reclaimed himself. And in that truth lies peace. I learned that parents must protect the dignity of their years, that children must learn the weight of gratitude, and that in this modern world, where greed too often wears the mask of family, character is the only wealth that endures. I whispered it again to myself as the leaves fell at my feet. I don't need their apology. I have my life. And that is more than enough. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.